So, what happens when a massive, booming industry suddenly slams into a geopolitical wall? Well, today we're diving into that exact story. We're talking about India's medical tourism sector and how it was forced into a massive, high stakes pivot to survive a crisis that was happening thousands of miles away.
To really get a sense of the scale here, just look at this number: $13 billion. That's what India's medical tourism market is expected to be worth by 2026. So we're not talking about some small niche industry. This is a huge economic engine, absolutely vital for the country's healthcare system and its reputation on the world stage. The stakes, incredibly high.
But this amazing growth story, it hit a serious snag. Right when things were really picking up speed, a totally unexpected crisis sent shockwaves all the way to Indian hospitals, threatening to throw the whole thing off course. And that set the stage for one heck of a challenge.
Okay, so first, let's just set the scene. For years, India has been building this incredible reputation as a global healing hub. And why? Well, it was this perfect combination. You had world-class doctors doing incredibly complex surgeries, you had the latest technology for things like cancer treatment, and, this is the kicker, the cost was just a fraction of what you'd pay in the West. It made India a go-to destination for people who needed top-notch care without breaking the bank.
And then, the disruption. The conflict in the Middle East, a region that was really the bedrock for India's medical tourism, started to have a real and painful impact. All of a sudden, that steady stream of patients that Indian hospitals had come to rely on for years just started to dry up. This wasn't a small problem. It was a full-blown crisis that needed an answer, and fast.
And you can see the impact right here. We're talking about a huge drop, somewhere between 15 and 20% in patients coming from those traditionally strong markets like Iraq and Yemen. And remember, these aren't just numbers on a graph. These were reliable, established pipelines of patients that the whole industry was built on. And now that pipeline was broken.
This slide really boils down the dilemma they were facing. The traditional pipeline from the Middle East, it was suddenly unreliable, disrupted, and full of uncertainty. That forced the industry to look in a completely new direction, towards untapped markets with a ton of potential, but that would require a totally different strategy. The old way of doing things just wasn't going to cut it anymore. This quote from an industry leader just captures the feeling of that moment perfectly. This wasn't some casual, long-term business plan to maybe explore new markets someday. No way. This was a we need to do this now kind of situation. The choice was pretty simple: adapt or face a massive downturn. They chose to adapt, and as we're about to see, they did it in a really smart way.
So, this crisis, it became the spark for what we're calling the Great Market Pivot. Instead of just hunkering down and hoping for the best, India's leading hospitals launched this incredibly ambitious, calculated plan. The goal wasn't just to replace the patients they'd lost, it was to build a more diverse, a more resilient future for the entire industry. So, where did they look? This chart shows you exactly where they turned their attention. The new focus landed on three key regions. The CIS countries, that's the Commonwealth of Independent States, which are former Soviet republics. Then you have Russia, and there's a really interesting reason for that we'll get to. And finally, various African nations, where there's a growing need for the kind of specialized medical care India offers. Okay, but picking new targets is one thing. Actually reaching them and getting them to come is a whole different ballgame, right? So to make this happen, Indian hospitals had to write a brand new playbook, a real hands-on strategy to build bridges to these new places and attract a totally new kind of medical traveler. And that strategy basically broke down into three very clear, very practical steps. First, they started talking directly with embassies to open up official channels and build trust. Second, they built up these crucial networks of on-the-ground facilitators, people in these new countries who could help patients with the whole process. And third, they went digital, launching targeted online campaigns to talk directly to potential patients about the treatments they could get in India. Now that focus on Russia, that was particularly clever. You see, Western sanctions have made it really difficult, sometimes even impossible, for a lot of Russians to get medical care in Europe or the US. That created a vacuum. And India's healthcare providers are stepping right in to fill that gap, offering top-quality care and a welcoming alternative. It's a perfect example of spotting a geopolitical shift and turning it into a market opportunity. So what does this all add up to for the future? Well, this whole pivot is way more than just a short-term fix. It is fundamentally changing India's role in global healthcare.
It's helping it transform from a country that relied on just a few key markets into a much more diversified, resilient, and truly global center for medical care.
You know, the big takeaways from this story are just so powerful. It's a crystal clear reminder that what happens in politics, even far away, can directly shape industries right at home. It shows that smart, quick adaptation isn't just about surviving, it's about becoming stronger. And maybe most importantly, it proves that a crisis, if you meet it with new ideas, can actually be the very thing that sparks innovation and future growth.
And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. This story is such a powerful reminder that global markets are always, always shifting. The industries that are going to win tomorrow will be the ones that can do what India's healthcare sector did, see the change coming and pivot. It really makes you wonder, as our world keeps changing, where is the next big opportunity or the next great disruption going to come from?